Did you know? Officially, it's Pollinator Week in Oklahoma, an excellent time for an in-depth discussion on the role that pollinators play in putting food on our tables. Since 2006, bees and butterflies have been dying off at alarming rates. Moderator Susan Cadot and her guests discuss what can be done to help save them.
Thank you, Rich, and I'd like to be the first to wish you a very happy Pollinator Week. We are celebrating with an esteemed panel of guests who join us right now on In-Depth, and I'd like to introduce you to them quickly because we have a lot to cover. First, we have Amy Seeger, who is the State Soil Health Coordinator for the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. Then we have Dr. Courtney Burr, who is an Assistant Professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Oklahoma State University. And then we have Jane Breckenridge, who is the Director of the Butterfly Farm and co-director of Tribal Environmental Action for Monarchs, or TEAM, and Tribal Alliance for Pollinators, and she's in Leonard, Oklahoma. I'd like to thank all of you for being with me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. Well, we're going to dive right in, and I kind of discussed a fact with you, a 2019 article in Business Week Insider, and I'm going to paraphrase it instead of reading the whole thing. But the bottom line of this article states that based on research that looked at 73 historical reports on insect declines around the world, it found the total mass of all insects on the planet is decreasing by 2.5% each year. And if this trend continues unabated, the Earth may not have any more insects by 2119. And that's where I'd like to start us off with on National Pollinator Week. And Jane, I'm going to start with you. You grow pollinators. What do you think about this statistic? Tell us what you do and whether or not this stat is accurate.
So from what I've read of it, the science is sound, and they looked at a lot of studies, and the situation is really that dire. I would also, beyond looking at the scientific data, I think that we've all noticed it. I certainly have. I'm out here in the country. We just don't have as many insects as we used to. And up, and I guess it'd be up the food chain, we don't have as many birds as we used to. These things are all tied together because when the insects disappear, then a lot of birds that you wouldn't even think of, they maybe they're seed eaters. They still have to feed caterpillars to their young. So what we're seeing is not only insect decline, we're seeing bird decline too. And, so we're definitely seeing it. What we do is help people, specifically tribes and tribal members, but others as well. We help them to help the pollinators. So we raise butterflies, which go out and they help educate people about native plants, native pollinators, the ecosystems that support them. But we also grow a lot of native plants here to help pollinators in the wild and try and help reverse this decline. It's been an amazing thing for us to watch as we've seen insect decline, to see as we've replanted the native plants back, as we've reduced our use of herbicide and pesticide, we're seeing them come back here. Just last week, we found the two-spotted bumblebee here, which had not been seen in Oklahoma since 1996. So we can do something about it. Everybody's got to do their part, though.
Dr. Burr, what is the cause of this decline? Do you also see a decline? Do you study this? Tell us about pollinators from the academic point of view.
Sure. So Jane is talking about a lot of native pollinators. So I've been more focused on honeybees. So honeybees are not native to the United States. A lot of people are surprised when they hear that. And it falls under agriculture because bees are actually a livestock species. And so they're an insect that is cultivated by people. It is managed just like other livestock, just like cattle and goats and other things are managed. It is a little bit out of the beekeeper's control to some degree, because if your neighbor or a neighboring farm is using pesticides off-label or something like that, it can really impact your bee colonies. They're also very sensitive to weather changes and things of that nature. And so the data when it comes to beekeepers is a little bit sparse. A lot of academics are kind of working towards increasing our understanding of what beekeepers are doing, how they're losing their bees. Are they losing it to mites? Are they losing it to weathering problems? And all of those sorts of things. So we're working to get that data to answer those questions.
Amy, I want to come to you next because Dr. Burr touched on pesticides and crop growth. What is the balancing act between farmers using pesticides that they need to grow their crops and not hurting the pollinators, honeybees or the wild pollinators?
So it is important. We have to remember farming is also a livelihood, especially for a majority of Oklahomans. And so it's important for our farmers and producers to be educated along with our OSU Extension guys, when to spray, options for spraying. But we also have what we consider and what I manage as the soil health department. And we are incorporating beneficial pollinators into our crop rotation by bringing in multi-species of cropping. So companion crops that will actually attract beneficial pollinators that can eat insects that could be detrimental to the crop. And so working with nature instead of against nature is one of our things that we are working on educating from our side.
Jane, I wanted to come to you and talk about the monarchs. I saw an article about you. You've got a butterfly on your finger. You are, that is a good industry to get in. It's an agricultural industry, right?
It is, and most people don't realize this. When I say that I'm a butterfly farmer, people think it's kind of a hippie hobby or something, but no, it is a real industry. Estimated by the USDA to result in about $80 million every year into the U.S. economy.
Jane, to stay on that, the milkweed, that's kind of a big deal, right, where butterflies are concerned?
It's a big deal. So it also gets a bad rap. So people hear the weed and they think, oh, that's a weed. I don't want it in my yard. But milkweed is actually a beautiful native plant. And most importantly, when the monarch butterfly is in the caterpillar stage of its life cycle, and if you remember back to your fourth grade science, every single butterfly is going to go through 4 life stages: egg, caterpillar, chrysalis, adult. When the monarch is a caterpillar, the only food it can eat is milkweed. No milkweed equals no monarchs. Monarchs are very special. All butterflies are special, but monarchs are part of an epic migration every year where hundreds of millions of these butterflies fly across the country. It's considered one of the most amazing natural phenomena in the world. And we're in danger of losing it. We've gotten too good at certain aspects of our farming. And so what somebody considers a weed, somebody else considers lunch. And so if we get rid of all the lunch for all those caterpillars, we're in trouble.
Okay, worst case scenario. Insects start disappearing and get down to a level that they cannot come back and they're going to disappear. You know, what happens if we don't have our pollinators? And any one of you can answer that one.
So every 3 bites of our food come from pollinators. So if you start taking pollinators out of that discussion, our food supply dwindles very dramatically.
There's a lot of food items that are very specific to specific pollinators. So a great example are figs. A lot of different species of figs has a very particular species of wasp that has to pollinate that plant. And so we can start losing, particular plant species pretty quickly if we wipe out entire species of pollinators.
And in some parts of China, I'm sure you maybe have seen these photos where they have actually sprayed so heavily with pesticide that they do not have any pollinators and they have to hand pollinate crops. And the photos are terrifying, where you've got people in white suits with little paintbrushes out there literally hand pollinating crops. Well, that's a pretty terrifying scenario to think about. A third of our food supply. We're just in trouble. And with pollinators, as they disappear, it's all connected, and their links on the ecosystem is built of many complex interactions. If you start removing links in those chains, those ecosystems collapse, and once they are gone, they are never, ever coming back. We have lost them for good.
What can Oklahomans and the state of Oklahoma do to address this issue? You think, it's just butterflies, or some people say it'll sort itself out. Nature will always sort itself out. What say you to these thoughts?
I think that we're making it very difficult for nature to sort itself out because we have taken away so much of what was there as a safeguard. We are losing over 1 million acres every year in the United States of monarch habitat just to development. We have intensification of agriculture, and there's winners and losers with that. but the natural world can't withstand these many insults. So a scientist that we work with, Dr. Chip Taylor from Monarch Watch up at University of Kansas, one time when we were driving around doing habitat assessment in Oklahoma, and he kept on saying, if I was a monarch butterfly, where would I find something to eat? And it's an interesting way of looking at it, because then I started doing the same thing. And I'm looking at our roadsides, which are mowed Bermuda and fescue and zoysia. And that's fine. But when we have all of that, and we've got pastures that are all managed for Bermuda and fescue, and we've got giant yards that are all managed for Bermuda and fescue and zoysia, if I'm a little monarch butterfly or a native bee or a honeybee, I'm not going to find anything to eat. So thinking about what some other states have done, they've replanted wildflowers to their roadsides and the right-of-ways. They have financial incentives for people to put native plants or pollinator plants in their yards. Everybody can put in a little pollinator plot, even just if a little pot, because the resources are so scarce. This is primarily a habitat issue. And so we all need to create those little oases of habitat wherever we can and be advocates for them.
Amy, what would you like to see Oklahoma do, or your fellow Oklahomans, to address this issue? Do you think it's an issue of concern?
Yes, I do. We at the Oklahoma Conservation Commission have partnered up with multiple state agencies and federal agencies. There's funding through the federal government for large landowners to apply pollinator habitat on their property. We as a state agency have also gone in and started promoting pollinator habitat in yards, just as Jane had recommended. It's called Yard by Yard, and we're encouraging pollinator habitat across urban areas through this program. And one little 10 by 10 area can help add to the benefits of the pollinators and encourage the diversity. You know, there was discussion, Jane mentioned the Bermuda and the fescue. One of our big program pushes is plant diversity. And each insect, just as the monarch requires milkweed, other insects require other plants. And so the more diversity that we get within our community, our plant community, our yards, our landscapes, the more habitat and the more protection we'll have for our pollinators.
And Oklahoma is on the migratory path for the monarch butterfly, right, Jane?
Correct. We are actually in the heart of the critical zone. And so Oklahomans have a special role and responsibility in the fight to save the monarch butterfly. When they're returning from Mexico in the spring, they have to find milkweed here to lay their eggs. Otherwise, the migration stops before it's even begun. In the fall, when they're returning, the great-grandchildren of the ones that left, they funnel right through Oklahoma and Texas. And not only do they need to find wildflowers to nectar up on to support themselves, if you're flying 3,000 miles, it takes a lot of calories. But they have to gain enough fat to live all winter long. They will not feed when they're in their overwintering grounds in Mexico. So they've got to fatten up. And if you're coming through Oklahoma, and again, you're just looking at a sea of Bermuda and fescue, man, you're going to be pretty skinny and you're not going to make it through the winter down there.
That's fascinating. And Dr. Burr, I want to wind up with you. You know, in your personal life, you're a beekeeper, right?
I am, yes.
So what is your advice for people, and maybe Jane, you may want to hop in there, if people are hearing this and think, you know, how do you get started keeping bees? How do you get started being a butterfly farmer? That sounds like a fantasy job, actually, and a lot of fun. How do you get started doing this?
So in OSU Extension, we're actually working on building up some materials for people who are interested in beekeeping. So we're creating some fact sheets and other programming that will be available very soon. My recommendation to everyone is to do a little research. It's pretty easy at this point with everyone having, Facebook and the internet, join a beekeeping group, join a, butterfly watching group or something like that. And, even if you do live in town, you can do simple things like plant pollinators' favorite plants. Or if you have a neighbor that happens to be a beekeeper, try and keep that pesticide use down to a reasonable level and make sure that you're doing it when it's not windy and that you're following the labels and things like that. But if you are interested in beekeeping, make sure you do your homework first. It's not a very difficult hobby to have, but you need to make sure that you know what you're doing so that you don't end up harming the bees or getting in over your head.
I would totally get in over my head with beekeeping. I'm going to stay away from that. But butterfly farming, that sounds right up my alley, Jane. How would I get started doing that?
So I think it depends. If you're really serious about wanting to be a butterfly farmer, then there are different ways you can get involved. There's the International Butterfly Breeders Association. You could also come out to the farm sometime and take a tour. We're just getting ready to start opening up for that. We've been on a long multi-year construction project, so you can tour and go behind the scenes and see what really happens, the magic of the butterfly farm. So nativebutterflies.org if you wanted to learn more about how we do it. But for everybody, everybody can do their part. Just even a little pot of milkweed, even a little pot of dill. You can bring in your eastern black swallowtails. There's all sorts of fun things, that you can do just to have the beauty of watching this miraculous thing right in your front yard. It's just, there's nothing else like it. It's wonderful.
And Amy, final words to everyone on this topic.
I would just like to reiterate what Jane had said. Anybody can do their part. We've got education through multiple agencies, through OSU, through universities. Reach out, start learning and understanding what natural resources are available for our pollinators.
All right. I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to join us. I know you're busy, and happy Pollinator Week to you three.
Thank you.
Happy pollinator
Thank you.
to you too.